Chris, I think your microphone is open.
Very quick mic check from you.
Are you reading? Are you reading? This is my mic check. Okay, good. It says Bill Davis, and you don't look like Bill Davis at all. This is Alex Lindsay coming in on SM7B, going into a Model 205, and it looks like it's pretty good. So, Cindy, you're reading?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. When I do the announcement, the reason I'm so like, are you reading? Are you reading? Is because the frame is inaccurate, and I look over at the frame when I do the announcement.
Oh, it certainly is.
So, oh, got it. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's supposed to be me today. It says in panel chat. It says me.
I don't have a countdown clock anymore. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I got a cue right before I went live. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, in where we answer your questions 7 days a week. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Cindy, what do we have?
Our first question today is from Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri, USA. And Vic is asking, I understand the aesthetic advantage of a low-profile mic arm, but don't they occupy valuable real estate on your physical desktop?
I go to Courtney.
Yes, they do. They can. The low profile, I have my microphone coming in from underneath. It's right there, but it's not on one of those like white, two-part horizontal stands. It comes up. You can get the camera here. It goes up and then down, so I can get underneath it. So it doesn't block my keyboard. It's hanging directly above where my hands go to the keyboard. with some of those that don't have an articulated first arm, in other words, it's just horizontal and it sweeps across the desk, and only the second arm, which comes up from there, is articulated as far as height adjustment goes. Those, you have to, parcel out your real estate on your desk, especially if they're mounted in the center of a desk and feeding out radially to your guests. You have to compensate for the fact that they're going to take up some real estate on the surface of the desk, and if you have coffee mugs or something, you can't move that mic stand horizontally without running into things. So take that into consideration. But there are others that come up and then back down to get in underneath.
Yeah, mine is attached to another table that's a little higher than this one, so I'm not blocked at all. The other thing is that as someone who was in radio for a long time that had one coming down from the top, it's in your sight vision if you have lots of monitors as well. So it really there's a whole bunch of downsides to having there's almost no time that I would prefer to have a high profile arm. Low profile arm is pretty much, after many years of using a high profile arm, I would never, ever use one again by choice. Next question.
Next up is Douglas Carmichael asking, the A&H Q and CQ mixers have a fixed minus 20 dB pad on the TRS inputs as per the manual, but not on the XLR inputs. Why could that be?
Go ahead, Marty.
That's a really good catch, Douglas. The reason is that quarter-inch inputs on a mixer are always line level, whereas the XLR inputs can be mic and line level. So you can minimize the gain on the XLR input when you're using that, and that will pretty much go down to unity gain. But if you need an additional pad because you have a really hot signal coming in from another device, then you switch over to the quarter-inch input, and that gives you an additional 20 dB of headroom.
Go, Ronnie.
This is a very popular question out in the forums, and it's been asked since day one. And I think it has to do with the people So the people buying these types of mixers are not necessarily the most professional. So I think there is a lot of musicians that are loving their instrument and doesn't understand the different type of levels that a mixer can get. And being that the CQ series have half and half, so half of them are pure XLR inputs for microphone levels, and the other ones are the other half is combo with the jack and XLR. So it's a very good question, and this is the answer.
Next question.
Here's a question from Guy Cochran in Seattle, USA. How do you prepare to use Dante at a remote venue?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, so normally we use a lot of Dante inside our studio, coming from computers using Dante virtual sound cards, etc. And everything is preset in the mixers and in the routing, so everything is kind of ready to go. If I was to use Dante in a larger broadcast situation, I would set everything before we went out, and pre-production would be really important. For other situations where we are just using Dante from a stage box to the mixer, that's as easy as just connecting any type of stage boxes that are digital, be it X32 systems or L&E, etc. So it's not a big deal. Of course, if you're using something like Yamaha, you have the option to also remote control the headamps in the stage boxes, so that is a good thing. And most of those settings are, of course, being done on-prem in the venue.
Go ahead, Marty.
So if you're using Dante entirely within your own closed network of audio and video gear, then the simplest thing is just you can use unmanaged switches without any DHCP address assignment. Dante devices will find themselves. However, if you are integrating into your venue's Dante system, then you need to get all your ducks in a row. You need to find out from them in advance how their Dante system is set up. Are they using VLANs? Do they have subnets? Do they require certain address ranges? Do they have internet access? You know, all of the things that you need to do Dante networking effectively, you need to arrange with them in advance, or at the very least, get all the information from the venue that they will provide to you in order to successfully integrate into their Dante network.
And I will say that for the most part, the big thing that we do is we set everything up beforehand. So we're usually within our own pipeline. We set it up. We try to keep all the copper on its own, so it doesn't really. There's not all the switches, everything else are only doing Dante. When they're in that process, you can do it in other ways. We just don't. It keeps everything simple. Make sure that your switches are not on eco setting. That's the number one problem we end up having when we're dealing with other people in the house. We usually try to drop a stage box and get analog outs from them if we can. If we try not to integrate with their Dante at all, and a lot of it comes down to clocking. It's simpler for us. It's not that you can't integrate those things. It's that in the heat of the moment, when something's going wrong, it's one less variable that you have to worry about is integrating with somebody else's digital signal, whether it's MADI or Dante. Next question.
Daniel Patridge in Rochester, Minnesota asks the panel, how often do you actually get rid of a microphone in your collection, if ever, and why?
I was like, I haven't heard of that. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I've tried. Lord knows I've tried. It depends. These days, it depends on your financial situation. If you have a mic, let's say, and the field of work that you're in. If you're, let's say, a production recorder, production sound mixer, and all of your work is done either on stage or in the field, but you don't do any voiceover recording. You do dramatic recording or sitcoms or theatrical films, whatever. And you have a U87 in your collection, but since you don't really record any voiceover, you don't do any post-production work, you might want to sell that U87 because it's very desirable. And that comes to another point as to why to sell it. You might want to hold on to vintage microphones because they tend to become more valuable as they get older. So those old tube type Neumanns can pull in a lot of money. And if you need the money to improve your working sound setup, that's another consideration. You could sell a vintage mic and get enough money to buy a top-end wireless mic or something that's more suitable to your current line of work. If you're retired like me, sometimes you want to get rid of your old mics, also depending upon their compatibility. I have a lot of vintage Schoeps microphones and Sennheiser microphones that are, from the 70s and 80s. They still sound great, but they're T-powered as opposed to phantom. So integrating them into a modern-day mixer is problematic because you have to have a different type of power supply, which is 12-volt T and not 48 volts. And if you plug them into the wrong power supply, it could damage them. So there's another reason to eliminate those older technology microphones from your collection because you could damage them if you're not paying attention to what you're pulling out of the case and plugging into your 48-volt powered microphone. So that's another reason. The problem is those T-powered microphones, when you try and sell them, people don't understand about T-power, and they may make the same mistake, and then they say, hey, these don't work. They're just plugging them into the power supply.
When did it change from T-power to 48-volt?
Oh, sometime, I think around the early 80s and 90s.
And what caused that?
Late 80s and 90s. Pardon me?
And what caused it?
Just, they were switching over, in Europe, they were more T-powered. And the problem with T-power, too, is it's polarity specific, depending upon the type. Some people in Europe had red dot microphones, and then there was normal dot. It depended upon which lead of pin 2 and pin 3 on your XLR was hot. It was positive voltage in the power supply going down to T-power, and T-power is 12 volts. So if you had them reversed, you wouldn't get power to the microphone. And if you had so you could flip the phase in the connector, but then your microphone signal would be out of phase. So it's kind of problematic in T-power. 48 volts sends the positive down both of the input leads, pin 2 and pin 3. And so it doesn't matter if the mic is out of phase or not, it still gets positive voltage, and then ground is your negative. And so there's no confusion about 48-volt power. Sennheiser switched, and I had a big fight with Sennheiser when they switched to 48-volt 416s and 816s, and I compared them. And I thought the T-powered were about 5 to 6 dB quieter self-noise than the 48 volts. And they said, oh, the specs are exactly the same. And I put them on the bench, on their test bench, and proved to them that no, they weren't exactly the same.
Interesting. What do you think caused the noise?
Difference in transistors and capacitors used in the power supply for the, inside the microphone, the FETs that were used to amplify that signal and to decode the RF. Those are RF microphones. They use a different methodology for extracting audio from the capsule. And it has to go through, there's a RF generator, which the capsule then varies the frequency of that RF generator by its capacitance. And then that is demodulated in the microphone, kind of like an FM tuner.
Right.
And that audio output is then sent through an FET preamp and out into your mixer.
That's cool. Ronnie?
Well, from another part of the industry, which is live production and stage performances, you need to have a lot of microphones. And if you get a new one, we recently got some Sennheiser, the 421 compacts for mic drumming or drum miking, so to speak. And the old ones are still in the shelves. And of course, in the case of Shure microphones like the 57 and 58s, they last forever until they don't work anymore, or they are so beaten up that we don't want to give them to artists. In that case, we can recycle them as paperweights or in a toolbox like for a hammer for the rest of the life.
We use a lot of older SM58s. Once they're not camera ready, they end up as talkback mics. Especially the ones with switches is a great way to just kind of you always look at them when you're next to it and it's all beat up and it's all pounded in, and it's like, well, that's what you get to use because no one gets to see that one anymore. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, it depends on what you do. If you do news gathering or portable film production, microphones are generally utilitarian, and what you use is highly dependent on your preference and your finances. So you might sell microphones in order to reinvest that money into a different model or a different brand or a different type of microphone that you find that you would use more often than ones you're selling, or that you like the way they sound. If you do music production, if you're in a studio, or other types of film production, or video production, then microphones become part of your toolbox. Different applications can use different microphones, and for some people, microphones are collector's items. I don't use these very often. I've got a fair amount of vintage microphones as well, but I did have opportunities to do some old-time live radio plays with an audience, and got to bring them all out, put them up all on stage, and they fit in with the aesthetic and with the content, and they sounded old-timey as well. So for some people, they are collector's items, and they accumulate in value, some of them. So do you get rid of microphones? Yeah, absolutely. If they no longer meet my needs, and if they're not worthy of keeping around. But I don't know. Some people do tend to collect them. I do.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Alex, you said not camera ready. I think this is it. You can buy the windscreens, and they sell them in 2-packs. Oddly enough, I think all the windscreens, $10 for 2 of them. I think all the windscreens have to be replaced.
I don't know why I've never thought of getting new windscreens. I probably should have, but as soon as they get dented, they just become talkback.
Oh yeah,
mics.
they look horrible. They look horrible.
And they're so inexpensive. You just buy another mic. I have so many. I have a pack. I have what used to be a 416 case, and it's got 3 SM58s either or, stuffed into it. It's like my little SM58 bag, And so, I have to say for me, for mics, if they're solid mics, if they're like real mics that I would use, I don't know if I've ever gotten rid of one. I had one stolen, but that's about it. That's about the only one back, 30 years ago or whatever. If they're USB mics or cheaper mics, they usually end up with podcast guests. I just mail them to them and go, just keep it. I've got a bunch of them that I've tested. They're all like, they're good enough, for a podcast. And it's cheaper for me to just send an old one that's been sitting around in my thing than it is to go buy another one for them. And it's actually cheaper for me to ground ship it to them than it is to have them send it back or try to figure it all out. So that podcast guests are the number one receiver of old. If you're wondering what happens when I test all those mics and I forget to send them back to Amazon, you'll see some random version of it at mostly Michael Krasny's podcasts. Next question.
Here's Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington asking, what are the key factors in successfully capturing the best dialogue audio?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Try and keep a clean background. This has become less of a mantra these days than it has been in the past because of the sophisticated AI noise removal cases. But try and reduce the background sounds as much as you can so that when your dialogue is cut together, because you're recording a scene over a longer period of time. You may be recording person A in the morning and person B in the afternoon, and your background ambience noise may change between the morning and the afternoon. So you have to keep that into account and try and eliminate as much off-camera noise as possible. You don't want to hear the noise of a clattery magazine on the camera or a fan if you're using a red camera that kicks in. So you want to use a directional mic and try and keep your on-camera voices sounding as good and as natural as possible. These days, a lot of time, everyone will track a lav on a second track as well as a boom. So in post-production, you can pick and choose which gives you the best quality sound for that particular environment. So that has become a best practice these days is to, if you can, if the wardrobe affords it, and if you have, and the budget affords it, they wire everyone these days, run them on separate tracks because everyone's recording multiple track recordings these days instead of the old days where we had to actually mix in the field and balance those microphones. And if we didn't get it right in the field, it wasn't going to be that right in the movie theater. So it's a little less of a daunting challenge to get everything mixed correctly in the field. You want to do a mixed track for dailies and for editorial so that they don't have to create one.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, whether you're recording dialogue at a desktop, in a studio, in someone's office for an interview, or an actor on stage, the key factors are keeping the room noise down. Room noise down, pay attention to reflections, and matching a microphone that complements the person who's speaking's voice. Different microphones have different voicings, meaning different EQ curves, and some will sound better with certain people and not so good on other people. Male, female, high pitch, low pitch, all things to pay attention to.
Yeah, complicated rooms are something, and a lot of times we're trying to, find ways to work around it. Here's a kind of a typical setup for us here. If you look at this, so we've got some. I think these were actually Sheps up here, and we have another mic down below. And the reason is people sometimes look down and they will move away from our shotgun mic, and we can grab onto their dialogue from below. This sound blanket here is just because we had hard walls. so we have hard walls over here, and so that was that is there to suck that up before it hits them. And so a lot of times we tend to use a lot of sound blankets everywhere when we're coming in, and it's very quick to just set something up that's just going to grab onto some of that reflection as you go. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Proximity. I can't. Just yesterday, I mean, we all know Tucker Dragu. He's got a good ear. I was in a meeting with Tucker. I was like, Tucker, your mic sounds weird. And he goes, oh. And he was wearing a lav, reasons. and he had taken it off to go grab something, forgot to put it back on, and it was just an arm's length away, and it sounded totally different. And I've done the same thing where we've sent mics to talent, and it was like, so do you have the mic that we sent you? Yes. Did you plug it in? Yes. Well, where is it? And this is what they do. They go, oh, hold on. And they have to reach clear out of frame. I was like, okay, that doesn't have to be in the room with you. It has to be in front of you. So let's rearrange some stuff. They're literally reaching way out of frame.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, proximity is the key to me.
Yeah, I'll generally, I mean, obviously there's some proximity effect that you want to try to avoid a lot of times or use, depending on what you're trying to do. But it's funny now that I've done so much mics, I'll listen to music and I can picture how close they are to the mic. Like they're like, oh, they're right up against the mic, or oh, they were pretty far away from the mic. And the studio designer had designed that for the sound, but I can hear it, and now I can you can hear in the vocals, especially because I'm working on a lot of 5.1 stuff. When they put the vocals down the center track, I hear it because I have the center track isolated, and you can listen to it. When you listen to it that way, you go, oh, they're really, really up against the mic, or oh, they're pretty far away. It does make a huge difference. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, a couple of the things is besides proximity is directionality. And the reason we used, hypercardioid or shotgun microphones is to eliminate a lot of the environmental sounds. But because of that directionality, you have to be very accurate with the pointing of that microphone. And it can sound completely different if you're, in front of the person and in front of him, and you're a little too deep and you're over the top of the head. If you're over the top of the head, you're gonna lose a lot of the high end. And if you're out in front, you'll still pick up that high end. So a good boom operator is almost essential if you've got moving dialogue and people moving throughout the frame. If the boom operator doesn't know the lines, your boom operator has to rehearse the scene, see where the actors are going to be, see which direction they're facing, see where they're going to walk, see where the shadows are cast from the lights, because besides being the best position to pick up the best sound, you have to worry about casting shadows of the faces of the actors or on the background. So you have to work all that out ahead of time during rehearsals. So your boom operator has to pay attention during all the rehearsals. The sound mixer can be off having coffee, and the boom operator will be on the set working out the delicate dance that he or she may have to do when the actors are moving around within the set and within the lighting that the gaffer has set up to ruin your day. So, there's that probability. And just when you get everything tuned in perfectly, the DP will come up and put a little direct OB on top of the lens that casts a giant shadow on the back wall of your boom microphone. But anyway, if they learn the dialogue, they have to arrive, and they're cueing the microphone between two people. They have to know when to break from the person who's speaking to be able to get to the next person's line without panning into them. Because with a directional microphone, if you're off axis, you lose a lot of the high frequencies. So you'll hear them pan into that person, and it makes for a little uncomfortable transition between lines if you're using a directional microphone and having to pan back and forth and you're late for the cue. And
just wait, and then after all of that, the director will decide to flop the scene. Anyway, go ahead, Marty.
And to complement what Courtney was just saying, every directional microphone has a range of angles that it will accept sound, but it also has a range of angles that it will reject sound. And that will be different with a cardioid microphone and a hypercardioid microphone and a subcardioid microphone. So choosing your microphone is important for that reason alone, and positioning the microphone so that if there is any kind of noise source in the room or any kind of reflection, that you want to have the rejection angles pointed in that direction so that you're rejecting that sound best. That's why when you look at a singer on stage that has a microphone on a stand, and then at their feet they have a floor monitor that is basically shooting the sound up to their head so that they can hear it. The microphone, which is generally a cardioid microphone, the backside of that microphone is pointed directly at the speaker because that is its optimal rejection angle. But there are other times when you might see a singer with two floor monitors, one to their left, one to their right, in which case that microphone would be a hypercardioid microphone because it has two rejection angles that are that go like that from the microphone. So each of the speakers is in the rejection zone.
Which is why we do everything we can to get people to use in-ears. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Alex, I don't know if you got a chance a couple days ago, and I guess it was last week, I sent you a link to a YouTube video. It's this guy, Eddie, I can't remember his last name. He runs the main boom, there's two of them, on SNL. And this is an in-depth 22-minute video where he gives this guy a tour through what it's like working on SNL, running the main boom. It's a Fisher boom that extends and has full rotation. Super fascinating. None of us are ever going to get to use that boom, but oh my goodness, what a great tool. Definitely.
Courtney's like, I've used that boom. I've used that boom.
Have you, Courtney?
Yeah.
A Fisher boom?
Yeah,
the telescoping one? So cool.
Sure, there's
so
a 16-footer and a 26-footer. It depends on how much reach you want. And then there's extensions that you bolt on the end of that, which he explains in that video quite well. And when you bolt the extension on the end, it's non-retractable. So that limits the amount you can retract it. So you can't work close to the boom stand, close to the preamp.
Super interesting video, though. Check it out.
Absolutely. Next question.
Our next question comes from Paul Val, who's in Austin, Texas. For podcast editing, is Descript's text-based workflow faster than traditional editing in Adobe Audition or Pro Tools?
A philosopher once told me that there are editors and there are people that edit.
That guy sounds super smart, Alex. Yeah, super smart.
Chris told me that while he was sitting over my shoulder while I was editing. Not a anyway. If you edit, then Descript might be faster than the text-based one. If you are an editor, it is not going to be faster. Descript's text-based workflow is really good for non-editors to cut things down. It may be good for assembly. So if you're not a very good editor and you don't edit all the time, you're not an editor. You edit things, and I've watched Chris edit. I've sat over Chris's shoulder. When Chris is editing, there's this flow that his fingers are, his mind knows what he wants to do in the edit, and his fingers are just doing that like you would play a guitar, right? So if you're not if editing, it doesn't feel like that to you, then you edit. You're not an editor. so when you're an editor, it's not just Chris. I was over at Michael Coleman's house, and he was showing me something, and same thing. We were tightening something up in an edit. And same thing. It's just, his fingers are just doing what he wants it to do, and it just kind of moves around and everything else. If you're like that, then you are then Descript is probably not going to be efficient for you. If you are if it doesn't feel like that for you while you're editing, then it could be faster, and especially if you're not an editor at all. What Descript's text-based workflow really replaces is a lot of times what we would do is we'd have long, 10 hours of 10-hour interview, or 10 hours of interviews, not the same person, but 20 minutes of this person, 40 minutes of this person. You go to what happens is you go to a convention or a conference, let's say Dreamforce or one of those tours, and you have all those people in one place at one time. So what we do is we take out a room in the convention center, and we set up a green screen, or we set up some kind of background, and then we do an Interrotron, and then you do hours and hours of bringing one big customer in after another, talking about how much they love the product, right? So I did a lot of that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of that. When we finish it that night, we take all the audio and we send it to a company called Production Transcripts in LA. The next day, we would have all those transcripts would be back to us in text format. And then we would send that to the client, and the client would highlight all the things that they wanted out of that and had time code on it. And so we were then able to then do an assembly edit. So we just assemble everything that they gave us, and we were able to then deliver that back to the client. Like, here's the assembly. How does that look? And we cleaned it up a little bit, but not very much. We were just like, this is what you asked for. Here it is. And then seeing the performances, and we would pick the best performances that we thought were there generally, or sometimes we'd give them all the performances if they really wanted them, in a certain area. But in general, we would just give them back that time code, And they would look at those performances, and a lot of times they'd be like, I want all 3 of them, or I want the 2 times they said that, or whatever. Then they would then give us a tighter edit, and we'd assemble that again. And then once they were done with that, then we started editing. Then we start cleaning it up, putting things over top of it, papering it over with B-roll, doing all the things that we needed to do to turn it into a final piece. But that paper edit was something that someone who doesn't know anything about editing is just saying, this is what I want. I think that Descript's text-based workflow, and many of the other Premiere has it, and Resolve now has it, is great for handing it to a partner, whether it's a client or somebody else, who doesn't edit, and just gets that most of the way, gets you 80% there. It's the last 20% that is the art, right? The first 80% is just getting everything into the right room. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, totally. I think the thing about any of the text-based stuff, and I have been really leaning heavy into the text-based editing in Final Cut as well. I don't reference timecode anymore. I don't need the transcript to have timecode. And some of the like automated, Riverside will do a transcript. Doesn't have timecode, but it's pretty good. It's close enough. And it's close enough that I can use the text base to just search for stuff. And the way you think of it, like Alex just explained, is there's different tools at different stages. I mean, I have, my wife gave me a hard time once. She came into the garage. She goes, because I bought a new saw. She goes, did you buy another saw? And I said, yeah. She goes, how many saws are you going to buy? And I said, eventually I'm going to buy them all. I'm going to buy all the saws.
But only when you need them.
Exactly. But the thing about them is they do different jobs. And you are not going to get a finished edit out of Descript. You're going to get your assembly edit down. Then you have to finesse and polish and trim frames and crossfade, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a great tool. It's not your last tool. If you think it's your last tool, you should rethink things. But it's a good tool.
Next question.
Zach Stahlsmith in Chautauqua, New York asks, I want to bring my Shure Axient unit into my X32 over Dante. I have the Dante infrastructure I need already in use, but just wondering if there are any tips or tricks with Axients and X32s. Thanks.
Good, Marty.
No, not really. The Axients have Dante built in, and when you connect them up to your network, into your Dante network, they should appear in Dante Controller as sources, as transmitters. You connect them up to the mixer channels that you want to receive them on, and you should be good to go. As long as your Dante network is configured properly, there shouldn't be any problem.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, make sure you have updated all the firmware, both on the X32 side and on the Axient side. There have been some issues with naming conventions that sometimes the Dante controller does not see the devices, but I think that is solved for some time back. So I think you should be good to go and have fun with excellent technology.
I kind of feel like having an Axient system connected. I have a couple X32s over here, so I use X32s. I've used them in lots of things. Having an Axient system connected to an X32 is kind of like putting Ferrari wheels on a Chevette. so it's kind of it's an interesting mix that you have there. Next question.
Here's one from Paul Val, who's in Austin, Texas. How does the new Shure Nexadyne series compare to the Sennheiser Evolution 900 series for live vocals in terms of feedback rejection?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I think it's the Nexadyne. I haven't used them both, and I haven't tried them both, so I'm not speaking from experience, but I'm just looking at the design of the different microphones. The Nexadyne uses a dual-engine capsule to create a cardioid. Here's a picture of it. Here's the capsule itself. Wait, no, that's not it. That one. I think it has a separate engine and a motor, as they say, which is the dynamic coil, moving coil. So it gives you a little bit wider sweet spot. It's still a cardioid, but with that wider sweet spot, you can get off axis a little bit, and you don't have to worry about it dropping off dramatically. However, they do say that it is a problem sometimes with feedback if you're holding it, if there's a cupping problem. If somebody's hand holding this microphone and their hand is too close to the top of the microphone, it can attenuate one of the engines and or reflect sound back into that, and it could cause feedback. And you'll notice this a lot of times when people put their hand too close and suddenly they'll get feedback. If they put their hand further down the microphone in a handheld mic, they'll eliminate more of the feedback. The Sennheiser is more of a conventional capsule, so people may like it a little bit better. It's a little smoother, and it's designed they design those capsules are tuned for the vocal range, so that it sounds a little sweeter on voices rather as opposed to picking up guitar amps or other things.
Next question.
Here's Tommy Chance in St. Paul, Minnesota, USA, asking, how does one send audio with low latency to a cell phone into remote speakers? It could be on the same Wi-Fi network. I would like to save on copper, 100 meters in each direction.
Good, Marty.
So there are a couple of ways to do this. Live streaming audio over Wi-Fi can be a little tricky, but VB Audio's VBAN and VTalkie is a very effective way to do it and very inexpensive. So you load the app up on your computer and on your cell phones, and it sends audio from the app over the network, over Wi-Fi, to the phones in a one-way situation, and it's pretty low latency and pretty high quality. So as long as the portable device is within Wi-Fi range, it will work pretty well. I've used them for hearing assistance. I've used them for IFB. It works pretty well. There are similar systems out there, but I know this one works.
Good, Ronnie.
Yeah, well, there's no mention of budget, so I will go to the other end of the scale and suggest you use Sennheiser Mobile Connect Station, which is really, really low latency and has really, really good app support. But the problem is it's really, really, really expensive.
How much is really, really, really expensive?
I think $3,500.
Okay. Yeah. That's not really, really expensive. That's just kind of expensive, just scale there.
Yeah, for Mr. Lindsay.
I would never swap wireless for wired. I would never put wireless in for wired if I could. I mean, the only reason I use wireless is because wired won't work. Like, I never ever use wireless as a convenience. So unless I can't get the wire, if I can get the wire there, I'm going to use a wire. Like if people are seated at a table, I'm never going to give them. I see people do this all the time. We're going to sit down and we're going to have a bunch of people seated at a table. They're not going anywhere, but we're going to all give them wireless mics. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing that? Like that's what's what we call in the business an unforced error. You're just like, what are, and so I would definitely not use that. I don't quite understand the use case that you have there, but I wouldn't use wireless if I wouldn't do it just to save copper. I would do it because the copper can't go through the concrete. Next question.
Next up is Tony Mobley in Noonan. I am looking for a secondary microphone. Extremely happy with my Heil PR40. Same quality if possible.
Go ahead, Chris.
Tony, my friend, I think you've answered the question for yourself. So here's the thing. You say secondary microphone. I don't know what you mean by that. If you want like a spare, just a spare in case your Heil goes bad, well, I'd buy another Heil. And the other thing is, if you need to ask yourself, do you want the second microphone? Are you ever going to use it with your Heil? Or do you need a variety of types of microphones? So if you're gonna use it with the Heil, just get another Heil. Like you're gonna put two mics of different caliber next to each other if you're gonna interview somebody and it's like, it doesn't sound the same. You're just driving yourself crazy. I get this all the time with pictures when people say, well, can you match those cameras? I go, well, kinda, but why don't you just get two of the same camera? I mean, you're going to go rent these cameras anyway. Just rent two of the same thing and you're one step closer to getting, things more consistent. But if you want a different type of camera, or a microphone rather, I would lean towards something like a condenser. Like this is a condenser, a million different condensers. So, but you want the same, you say same quality if possible. It is possible. Get another heil.
Next question.
Here's Brody Hefner in New York City asking, are there any circumstances in which you would use one shotgun mic to capture dialogue from two speakers in close proximity to one another?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, but you have to cue the microphone between the two speakers, as long as they're not speaking with overlapping dialogue. And generally in scripted drama, you try and avoid overlaps if at all possible, because that limits your editing in post-production. Because if two lines overlap, they may take one may have been the best for actor number one, and take three may have been the best for actor number two, and you want to cut those two pieces of dialogue together. But if they overlap at the cut point between their lines, you can't cut. You'll hear the cut between the two, because you'll cut from an off mic sound for the second person to an on mic sound. So you have to make sure that the dialogue is kept separated, so that and you can bring it back together. If they're supposed to interrupt each other, it depends on the director. Some directors will accommodate a sound mixer, and some won't. Some will force you into overlaps. In that case, you don't want a really high directional microphone. So you either want to have two microphones, one on each person, and mix them together so that the overlaps don't sound off mic. Any of the overlaps don't sound off mic. But if the director allows you to maintain distance and prevent overlaps, then you can use a single directional microphone and cue it accurately between the two people. And that way your background sound stays the same, and you're not doubling your background sound by bringing in a second microphone. And you're just keeping that one microphone panning back and forth between the two. So that's one reason you do it.
Good morning.
Right. So you have to, depends on how far apart they are. If they have any kind of distance, and remember that the shotgun microphone is going to have a very narrow pickup angle. So if they are shoulder to shoulder, then, and you have the ability to have the distance necessary so that both people are in that pickup angle, that would be acceptable. One microphone can be better than two, because if you have two and they're both picking up the same sound source, you'll get phase cancellations. So in some cases, more is less. If there is any separation between the two people, you need to be able to swing the microphone back and forth to each person, and that requires a little bit of anticipation as to knowing when the next person is going to start speaking, so that your microphone is not following the person speaking, but leading the person speaking. You want to arrive, the microphone wants to arrive just as they are starting to speak. So, and that's a problem when you have overlapping speech. So yes, there are times when it can do it, and times when you might want to consider a second microphone.
Usually the only time I do this when there's two people is if I'm backed into a corner. So I usually come with a lot of mics, and if I'm going to have the opportunity to point a mic at each person, I'm going to do that. So what you're talking about is something I might do because I had to, but not something that I would do by choice. Next question.
This question is from Roland Booth in St. Andrew. Given a choir of 30 to 40 people, what is the minimum number of microphones you would recommend to best capture the performance?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
I would think 3, depending on how wide the choir is positioned, or if there are positioned in groups. But one thing to be very careful about is the 3-to-1 rule, which is shown here. And as you can see, if you have a distance from the front row to the microphone for, let's say, 2 to 3 feet or up to 1 meter, you should multiply that with 3 to have the distance to the next microphone. And this is to avoid phase cancellation from each of these microphones interfering with each other. And As you can see here, there are around 20, 25 people here in this choir. And what I tend to do is to also make them stand a little bit in groups, not that it's visible from the audience. Another thing to think of is to place it pretty high, so 2 to 3 feet over the highest person in the choir, even if they're sitting or standing, and aim the microphone at the mouth or the face of the person in the back, and that way the pickup pattern for the microphone will kind of equalize the levels from the person standing in the front row, because it's a little bit more out of focus of the microphone when the person in the back will be in the center of the pickup. So this is the rule of thumbs. And lastly, I would say that there is a really good resource out there, which is, let me see here. This one from DPA, which is called the Mic University. I would just look up there. I've been using that for years to learn and to show our apprentices and people that would like to learn about this.
Go ahead, Marty.
So it depends on how many rows of people are standing in front and behind each other. 3 rows, 5 rows, 10 rows, depending on the size of the choir. Well, 30 to 40 people would be either 3 rows or 4 rows of 10, or it can be a row of 20 people across. There would be like 2 or 3 rows. You want to, again, know your microphone, know what its pickup angle is, and you want to have them, first of all, you want to be sure that you have a quiet stage, because bleed can be a real problem because you're distance microphoning. You're picking up sound at a distance. You don't want to have the microphone so close to any 1 or 2 people that they dominate what the sound field is being picked up. You need to get the distance so that you're hearing everybody in the pickup pattern as an ensemble rather than individual voices, and that requires distance to do. And you would want to have your microphones spaced accordingly so that the person on the edge of one microphone is also being picked up on the edge of the next microphone, because on those edges the sound pressure is going to be less. The way the microphones pick up is the more off-axis you get to the microphone, the lower in volume it's going to be. And so you want to have a little bit of overlap, just a little bit, not a lot. And you still want to maintain the 3-to-1 rule, meaning that the distance between microphones should be at least 3 times the distance from the microphone to the people that they're picking up. So balance it out.
Go ahead, Chris.
You know, Roland, I've never had the opportunity to mic a great choir, but I've done a lot of okay choirs. And in my experience, we used to do this big Christmas pageant show thing. There was backing tracks, and they were loud, and the singers were, okay. Some of them were really good, and I always lobbied with the music director, can we just take 4 people, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and give them handheld mics, let them fill out most of it. I realize it's completely opposite of what Marty was just saying, because you don't want to hear individual voices. But in this case, it would have been okay. And then let the choir, play along, and they're gonna add something, but really soprano, alto, tenor, bass. But with loud backing tracks on stage, it's just a nightmare. I'm glad I don't do that anymore.
Next question.
Pedro G. Gonzalez III in Nashville, Tennessee, asking, can someone on the panel demonstrate how you typically configure a noise gate on a digital mixer? Threshold, attack, release, etc.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
I'm not the most well-versed person to do this, but I can talk a little bit about the differences that we think of when we are doing this. I normally have a A1 or a sound engineer doing this for us if it's advanced. And that is, it depends. It depends on everything. It depends on where the microphone is placed on the instrument, if it's a bass drum, if it's a guitar, or if it's singing, or whatever it could be. You can even have noise gates just on the vocal microphone as well as anything else. So it really depends, and you have to use your ears to listen to this. Of course, there are digital mixers today that have some kind of profiles that you can load easily just to get a kind of starting point, but everything depends on what you are playing, the source of the audio, and what it's supposed to sound. Two different audio technicians can have different settings for the bass drum internal mic, and that can be very, very different from the other one. So it really depends.
Good, Marty.
Yeah, it's exactly right. What Ronnie was saying is that it's highly dependent on the source material, on whether you're talking about a speech or a vocal or instrument, how much noise there is in the background, what is the characteristic of the noise, of the background noise versus the characteristic of the source noise, the intended sound rather, not the source noise. There are times when I'll tell you this, for speech microphones, like a minister at church delivering a sermon or standing there on stage, I would use an attack of like 20 milliseconds, a hold time and a release time of about 250 milliseconds each. And what that does is it sort of and a range of only about 10 to 12 dB. And so that, in effect, like brings the fader down just a little bit, 10 or 12 dB between phrases, helps quiet down any sort of room noise. And if there are two people speaking, there are times when two ministers are on stage, they both have head-worn mics, and they're alternating. And I would use a auto mixer for them, and also, in addition to that, use an expander, and which is sort of a gentle noise gate with the settings that I just gave. And that really helps to separate the two, reduce phase cancellations from each microphone picking up the opposite person, and really helps to improve the intelligibility. But if you're also talking about music, where you have a band on stage and a lot of bleed because the stage is a live environment, it becomes a lot more challenging and difficult and important to get your settings right. There's another thing about noise gating that becomes much more selective, in that in some noise gates you have the ability to use a side chain in which the active noise gating element is triggered not by the full frequency and level of the sound, but by focusing on a specific frequency band or for specific frequency itself to trigger it. So that if you have a singer and that microphone is also picking up the bass amplifier, you can trigger the noise gate on 1K, for example, which is in the middle of the voice range, and it will not be triggered by the bass, the sound of the bass itself, which is a very big problem for that. So there's another way to use the noise gate to be a little bit more specific.
Next question.
Here's one from Vic Hernandez in Springfield, Missouri, USA. Is the XYZ axis of a microphone important, or is it just about getting the best audio capture?
Good, Courtney.
Well, it is important because if you pay attention to it, it will give you the best audio capture. And it depends on the type of microphone that you're using. Different microphones have different pickup patterns, and so you want to look at the pickup pattern of that microphone. That's what we refer to as omnidirectional. In other words, it picks up sound from all directions around the microphone head. Cardioid, which is shaped like a little heart, which means it picks up its primary sound from in front of the microphone in the shape of a little heart, and it rejects sound from the back of the microphone or the back of the capsule. So you use that cardioid pattern to eliminate background noises, things that you don't want to capture. Like, let's say, if you're miking an object, you want to point the microphone at the thing that is generating the sound, and the back of the microphone needs to be pointed at the things that you don't want to capture. So that's the XY. Now the Z has to do with the distance of the microphone. Now, if, of course, closer is better. And you got to remember that sound behaves just like light. It observes the inverse square law. So if you look at the diagram of how sound goes out here, the distance between the sound source and the listener, or the microphone and the sound source, deteriorates at the inverse square of the distance. So at this distance, it'll be this much reduced. At 2 times the distance, it'll be 4 times reduced. At 4 times the distance, it'll be 16 times reduced, and so on. So the distance gives you the signal-to-noise ratio, noise being the thing that you don't want to record, and signal being the thing that you do want to record. So the closer to your signal source, the better. And as you move further away, it drops off much more radically than a linear drop-off. So, distance, by varying the distance just a few inches, can affect your signal-to-noise level dramatically.
Go ahead, Marty.
Right. So X and Y, horizontal and vertical. Most microphones, those with circular capsules, generally have a very uniform pickup pattern between horizontal and vertical. Now, I say most, because not all microphones have a circular capsule. Some are rectangular. And this is where it becomes important to understand how to read a spec sheet, how to read a polar pattern on your microphones, because sometimes the frequency response will be slightly different in the horizontal and the vertical axis. And then, as Courtney was saying, you have the acceptance angles in front and you have the rejection angles in back. We talked about that earlier in the show. And the z-axis would be distance. And Courtney is exactly right. The inverse square law applies equally with microphones as it does with loudspeakers. But here's the thing, most people don't really think about this. A microphone at 1 foot or, at about 1 foot from your mouth is going to pick up a certain angle. If I double that distance, it's going to pick up half as much. And if I bring it closer, it'll double the sound output. But, that applies with vocal microphones. Then you have the proximity effect, where the closer you get, the more bottom end you'll pick up, and that applies more to certain microphones than another. The SM58 is famous for that. Blues singers take a really good advantage of that. And the farther away you get, the less low end you will get. And so you'll get more mids and more highs from miking at a distance with some microphones than with others. Right.
Next question.
Mike Potter in Hanover, Germany is asking, can you recommend microphones for recording a guitar combo tube amp or a guitar speaker cab? I am thinking of a dynamic mic such as the Shure SM57 or Sennheiser E906.
Go, Ronnie.
I use both of them, so you have the answer yourself. Just be very detailed about where you put them, so adjust them accordingly and use your headset to listen in and listen that you get the audio you need.
Next question.
Roland Booth in St. Andrew is back with us. What are your top recommendations for choir microphones?
Go, Ronnie.
Yeah, we use the Sennheiser 915, but this is actually a question about is it live or is it for recording? It doesn't say. So for live situations, you would need microphones that are kind of a little bit more sensitive to signal before feedback. So I would test. Maybe rental houses can give you a list of things that you can test for your situation. But the Sennheiser 914 is something that we use a lot of.
And DPA makes a lot of good mics for this as well. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, one of my favorite microphones is the Audix Micro series that you plug onto the end of a really long, thin boom mic, boom that goes on the top of a regular standard mic stand. These come in a variety of pickup patterns. You can get cardioids, hypercardioids, and be able to change them out. So the mic capsule plugs on to the end of that boom. These are really, really good microphones, and they come in a couple different series, so you can pick and choose what you want. And they're really convenient because they can go on a mic stand. They're very portable. You can put them wherever you want. You can also get them in a hanging version. And I've actually taken these booms and actually hung them down over a microphone from above. So they're very versatile. And
Tim McCulloch says DPA 4011F, the AT 4051, and AKG C460. Thank you so much for all the great questions. And another heavy audio day, and well asked by our producers and well answered by our panelists. Thank you so much to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that makes this work. We do this 7 days a week. We have not missed a day since March 25th, 2020. Someday that's going to be like 20 years ago. We haven't missed a day. And it's all because of this incredible volunteer team that not only is the panel and the producers asking the questions, but really making sure that this is edited well and engineered well. And there's all, just that we're checked out before we get here, that we're given communication during the show. It's really an amazing dance that happens every single day by volunteers. And we really appreciate everybody's contribution. Today, if we had done this in person, the Tlaloc Traversal, we would have traveled 28,000 miles, and that is 46,000 kilometers, and that is 225 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. It's a lot of potassium. That's all I got to say.
Lots.
All right. See you later.
Nice. Thank you, everyone.
All righty. Bye-bye.